Okay. Um, I'm just gonna wait for the stream to catch up, just to make sure that my audio is working properly. Boom. Hold on now. Let's just give it a few seconds. Okay, I think we're all good. So, yeah, as you can probably tell from the title of this stream, we're going to investigate whether Muhammad was a prophet or not. So how are we going to do that? Well, we have to go through the Quran, we have to go through the Hadith, and we have to see whether his claims stack up. So I'm going to share a particular Quran verse, and we're just going to take it from there essentially. So this is Quran 61 verse 6. One of my favorite Quran verses. Partly because it's just there's no proof for it. But we're gonna use it nonetheless. Let me just share. I want to share this tab so you guys can see, and then again, as I say in every stream, like if you Muslims are listening and want to come on and try and explain, absolutely feel free to do so. I'd be happy to have you on. So how do I share? Here we go. Share screen. Share this one. Perfect. So as you guys can see, this is a claim that the Quran makes about Jesus. Okay. So let's have a look at the claim, and then let's look to the evidence for this claim. Okay. So for anyone who's wondering, this is part of the reason why I don't believe in Islam or Muhammad. Why I believe Muhammad is a false prophet. Why I believe the Quran is a false man-made work by an Ummi. It's because of stuff like this. At the end of the day, like if you're going to claim stuff and then simultaneously, claim stuff as a text and then simultaneously claim to be Kalam Allah, then I would expect perfection. But that's where the Quran consistently shoots itself in the foot. So let's read it. And remember when Jesus, son of Mary, said, "O children of Israel, I am truly Allah's messenger to you, confirming the Torah which came before me, and giving good news of a messenger after me, whose name is Ahmed." Yet when the prophet came to them with clear signs, they said, "This is pure magic." So what's going on here? Well, according to chapter 61, verse 6, Jesus told his followers that a prophet named Ahmed, who's supposed to be Muhammad, by the way, is going to come after him. Now, that's why, for example, you have a verse, and I'm going to try and find it actually, where essentially what happens in the Quran is that the Quran claims that Muhammad is prophesied in the Torah and the Injil. Let me just see if I can find that now because I want to get it up. Muhammad prophesied in the Bible, Quran. Oh, hold on. What's going on here? Quran verse. Now let's see if we can get this up. Oh, I think it's this one. I think it's this verse. But again, you're going to see the connection when we go through it. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Here we go. So, again, just as a reference, this one is saying that essentially Jesus told his followers that Ahmed is coming after him, who's supposed to be Muhammad, allegedly. And then you have, for example, in chapter 7, verse 157 of the Quran, you have this verse. Like, this is as clear and explicit as you'll get, right? There are the ones who follow the messenger, the unlettered prophet, whose description they find in their Torah and the gospel. So allegedly, he can be found in some shape or form in the Torah and the gospel. Okay. On top of that, there's allegedly a direct prophecy from Jesus where he told his followers that Ahmed is coming after them. My question to Muslims is, let's start with chapter 61, verse 6, and then we can go to this one. Okay. If Jesus said Ahmed is coming after him, where is the evidence of that prophecy? Simple question. Where is the evidence of that prophecy? Okay, because it's a very direct claim. It's not something trivial. Like if you're going to tell your followers something, that's quite a monumental thing to say. So they should have recorded it. Like at the end of the day, they recorded so much stuff. Like that's one of the biggest things he would have said if he said that. Therefore, logic follows that they would have recorded it in some shape or form. So, can you as Muslims produce to me a single document where Jesus said, Ahmed is coming after me? If you can, as I said, please come on the stream and discuss, because I would love to hear your insight into this, because as I said, I haven't found it. It doesn't exist. It just seems to be something that Muslims make up. Okay, or at least that Muhammad was making up when he put together this text. Because for me, all the proof indicates that he never said that. Like, that's why, for example, within scholarship, unanimously, it's accepted that Christ never said Ahmed is coming after him. No credible modern academic accepts that. That's a rejected claim. And we can go to the video a little later where AP has a discussion with Bart Ehrman, since Muslims for some reason like to use Bart Ehrman. But the irony of it is that Bart Ehrman simultaneously completely buries your own position, because he doesn't believe Islam to be true. He believes Islam is false. But you guys will stand for some reason by Ehrman when it comes to so much of his stuff, but then when it comes to the other stuff where he clearly refutes you and does a total 180 on you, all of a sudden then he's not reliable in those areas. In other words, it's a form of cherry picking. But yeah, so like chapter 7, verse 157 claims that Muhammad is prophesied in some shape or form in the Injil, which would be the New Testament, and the Torah, well, however you guys want to call it. So where's the evidence of those prophecies? If you can find them, that'd be great. There's a verse where it says the Quran itself was prophesied. I'm going to see if I can find it. Because this kind of shocked me a little bit when I found that. Hold on now. Let me see now if I can find this, because as I said, this I was quite surprised by this. Okay. I might have to check somewhere else, but essentially, there's a Quran verse where it states that the Quran itself was prophesied, which, by the way, is extremely surprising. Let me see if I can find this. Oh, here we go. This is the one. I think I found it. Yes. Yeah, this is so it's chapter 16 or 26 verse 196. I'm going to share this with you guys just so you can see. But basically what it says in line with the other verses, but this one is very bizarre because this says the Quran itself was prophesied in the Injil and the Torah. which is really strange. So you have this verse, then you have the verse, what's it called, with it's saying that Muhammad was prophesied, and then you have another verse, the first one that we looked at, chapter 61 verse 6, where it says that Jesus directly told his disciples that Ahmed is coming after him. Again, what is the evidence of any of these claims, and how are they dealt with, for example, by critical scholarship? What's the critical position on these viewpoints that the Quran gives? Do they agree with the Quran, and are they saying yes, the previous scriptures do point to, let's say, Muhammad, the Quran, and the message of Islam? Well, the reality of it is they don't, right? If you're consistent with what scholarship says, they'll totally deny that for a number of reasons. Again, it's strange to me. I always find this quite bizarre that Muslims are sitting there trying to use extremely, let's say, liberal scholars within the field of let's say, New Testament and Old Testament studies, but ironically, these same scholars totally refute and disregard your religion, your book, and the man whom you deem to be a prophet. Like, it's strange in the sense of, okay, why are you cherry picking like that? I know the logic behind it, but you're willing to oversee something that's extremely detrimental just for the sake of trying to land a blow. It's sort of like, I'm willing to take an uppercut just so I can land this overhand right. It doesn't make sense, and that seems to be the Islamic approach when they try and come up with a rational argument for Islam, because they know that even the academics that they try and use to refute other people's positions are the same academics that completely are against their position in every sense. So it's a strange approach, and again, whenever I speak with Muslims, it's the same thing I tell them. It's like, why, for example, why are you using Bart Ehrman when Bart Ehrman believes categorically that Jesus was crucified? Okay, on a historical basis, he believes categorically that that's a historical fact. Bart Ehrman isn't sitting there like, conjecture, I wonder if he was or wasn't. No, Bart Ehrman's saying, I know with 100% certainty the man was crucified. He's not disputing that, and that for him is based on the evidence as a historian. It's not just him. Same applies to what's his name, James P. Meyer, and like, for example, E.P. Sanders. Guys like that are all kind of in the same boat, right? Doesn't matter whether they're agnostic or atheist scholars. They're all in full agreement, full alignment that this particular event was a historical event, which the Quran itself historically, on a historical basis, completely denies. So yeah, it's like, what do you do with that? Let's bring up the Ehrman video. I want to show you guys something. All right, I'm going to share this, and I want us to have a look at this together, because again, this is Bart Ehrman speaking. So since Muslims like Bart Ehrman and he seems to be an authority for them, I want to get their thoughts on this. So let me just share this. Okay, and then let me also make sure that the sound itself is sharing.
For a fact that they all converted. Connected to that then, how plausible do you think it would be for the disciples who lived and spent months and years with Jesus and then watched him die? How plausible is it that they would then come to view this man as having been or still being God?
Okay, so just before we continue, I'm just going to frame the question, okay, for Muslims watching. So she's asking Bart Ehrman, one of your favorite scholars to use, if the direct disciples of Jesus himself came to the view or came to the belief that Jesus was God and then approached him from that point onwards as divine, okay, as Allah, if you will. Now remember, according to the Quran, the disciples of Jesus are very clearly stated as Muslims, okay? The Quran says they're Muslims, okay? These direct disciples, right? The direct 12 that Jesus had, according to the Quran, they're Muslims. She's asking Bart Ehrman from his expert opinion, his expert viewpoint, did the disciples of Jesus believe Jesus was God, okay? Now remember, if they did, from Bart Ehrman's viewpoint, Bart Ehrman is stating that they were not Muslims and that they were committing shirk, okay? Which again goes against the historical claim of your Quran, which states, no, these guys, they were just Muslims. They were just Muslims, nothing more, okay? They didn't believe Jesus was God. They just followed him as a prophet, as the Quran itself claims. That's the question she's asking. Let's listen to Bart Ehrman's response, right, as to whether they believed he was God or didn't believe he was God.
Yeah, right. I mean, in the Gospels, they spend a lot of time with him. I mean, the Gospels aren't consistent necessarily in how long the ministry of Jesus was. In John's Gospel, it's maybe 2 or 3 years. With the other Gospels, it's not clear if it's some months or how long it is. But however long it is, they've been with Jesus going around, and so then they're saying that he's been raised from the dead. And become, in some sense, a divine being. And so how plausible is that? Well, it seems to have happened. I mean, and the reason they're come to believe that he's the divine Messiah, the Son of God, who is God's chosen one, whose death really matters, that he's a different kind of Messiah, that he's not the political military leader that we might have been expecting, but he's somebody who died for the sins of others. I think that belief happened right away.
Bam. Did you hear it? He said that it happened right away. Now, there's a part in this video as well where he also addresses the nonsense claim that Muslims try and come along with by saying Paul invented stuff. No, Paul didn't invent anything. It was already there because it happened right away. Okay, this is the point that you guys have to be cognizant of. This is the academic viewpoint. Okay, this is Bart Ehrman saying it. Okay, the worship of Jesus, according to Bart Ehrman, I just played the clip. By his direct disciples, it happened right away. Now let's listen further to the explanation that he gives. But keep that in mind, because you guys like to use this guy. This is his view of the direct disciples of Jesus, that right away the worship of Christ began. Okay, their belief that Jesus was Allah began right away. It wasn't a later invention. It wasn't anything. These are the people that were with Jesus, walked with Jesus, saw Jesus, and were, if you will, ministered to by him and trained by him, discipled by him, whatever you want to call it. These direct disciples, which your Quran claims were Muslims, Bart Ehrman is saying no. They came to the belief that he was God right away. Okay, and that's what they that was the part of the message they were spreading. Okay, so let's continue to listen to what else he says.
I don't think that was something that occurred to them long after. It's certainly not something Paul invented, the way some people claim that Paul.
Well, there you go, Muslims. It's definitely something that Paul didn't invent. And again, let me just say, Hamza, okay? Yeah, like you heard what he just said there, okay? He's saying Paul didn't invent that. Paul didn't invent anything. This was something that the direct disciples of Jesus came to believe. Okay, this is an academic viewpoint by one of your favorite scholars that you like to use. And he's saying the direct disciples came to the belief that Jesus was God right away. And on top of that, it wasn't a later invention. It was something that happened immediately. Okay, and then as I said, that was part of the message that they went out to spread. Okay, in terms of their viewpoint of Jesus. So this is the point. Okay, and if you're going to claim otherwise, and you're going to use this guy for other facets of your argument, okay, why are you totally turning a blind eye when he says stuff like this? Is he still reliable for you now? Because this is his expert viewpoint. And this is consistent, by the way, with all the scholars Muslims like to use. Muslims shouldn't be allowed to use any scholars against any other religion, simply due to the fact that the same scholars that they use are the same scholars who agree with 100% certainty that the Quran is a false text, riddled with historical errors, gets historical details wrong. Muhammad's a false prophet. Muhammad doesn't know what he's talking about. He's ignorant. He gets stuff wrong. And the entire thing is just man-made, and it's made up. It doesn't matter it does not matter if the text itself was produced in the 7th century during the time of Muhammad, and we have a manuscript that demonstrates that, okay? I've argued before, look, I believe the Quran is well preserved. I don't believe it's perfectly preserved. I believe it's well preserved. But whether it's well preserved, perfectly preserved, it means nothing in the grand scheme of anything if the text is clearly a fraud, okay? Because there's other texts that have been perfectly preserved across history, okay? Doesn't make them from God. It's the content, right? It's what helps us discern whether it's actually from God or not. And if a text, even if it's been perfectly preserved, is riddled with errors, okay, riddled with historical inconsistencies, for example, when it claims to be Kalam Allah, then that's a clear contradiction. Okay, therefore, I have no reason to take it seriously or have any faith in it as a text. But you as Muslims will stand by it and say, no, it's it's true, it's authentic, it's Kalam Allah. But then when I ask you to prove it, you don't ever want to prove it, because I think that's just simply due to the fact that you can't. Okay, you have, like, this is the thing, Muslims. Okay, you have to prove, okay, when you're doing your so-called dawah, right? Instead of going on the polemical, because I argue this every time, and I'm gonna bring up the video of Hamza in a minute. Hold on now. But basically, the point I'm getting to is that you guys have to prove your religion, okay? If you want to convince me of your religion, you have to prove it. You have to give me sufficient reason to believe. Sufficient reason to believe is not attacking my position, okay? Polemically, like, going on the polemics doesn't act as an evidence for your own position. Like, that's the thing Muslims fail to recognize. You have to prove your own position. And this is for any person who's trying to build a case. Okay, I understand why they like to do polemics, and I understand why some people, what's the word for it? Crumble, I guess, under polemics, and then end up conceding and then going over to the other side. But even the people that concede, just because let's say someone makes a good polemical argument, fair enough, they make a good polemical argument, but that doesn't act as an evidence for their own position. You then have to say, okay, even if you disprove my position, now prove yours. Prove your position. Okay, you made a good argument against my position, but what's the argument for your position? If you want me to accept it, what's the argument for? That's the part Muslims never want to go to. They never want to go to it. Prove Muhammad was a prophet. They never want to go to it. Justify Muhammad's morality when it comes to, for example, him condoning, pedophilia, right? To him condoning the abuse of women. Okay, to him having numerous people executed and killed just because they disagreed with him. Okay, him treating anyone who's not a Muslim as utter dirt. Okay, we can go to the what's called the Quran verse on jizya and look in Ibn Kathir's tafsir when he tells them that those people who are non-Muslims don't deserve respect and deserve to be treated as the lowest of the low and should be pushed out into the gutters. Okay. Allegedly, that was Muhammad's view of anyone who was a non-Muslim. So justify that stuff. Justify him actually receiving revelation. Okay? Like, give a reason. Like, I understand what they'll say to some degree. Okay, it's a matter of belief. Yeah, but you only believe in something really. Not in all cases. Some people are just indoctrinated to a point where they don't even think about it anymore, sadly. But if you want to convince someone to believe in something, you have to give them sufficient enough reason to do so. Okay, I'm not saying you'll have 100% or 200% proof to get them there, but if you can give them a sufficient reason or a sufficient argument, they can then take seriously the claim. A non-argument is not an argument, okay? Or as we call it, an argument from silence. So again, you must prove the prophethood of Muhammad, okay? You must prove and demonstrate, for example, and justify his morality in light of what we know today, okay? And by the way, that's not a get out of jail clause to say, well, times have changed. Well, according to your Quran, he's the prophet for all generations, okay? And his example is one for all generations. In other words, whatever he was doing back then is what you today are supposed to follow and do likewise, okay? And perfectly, since he's regarded as the ultimate example, okay? Then you have to prove the Quran is from God, okay? You then have to explain, for example, and give a justification for all the historical inconsistencies of the Quran, and then also the claims of the Quran that are refuted by the evidence that we have today. You have to do all of that if you're going to create a convincing argument for your text. Because, like, here's the thing, right? This is the Muslim approach to dawah, generally speaking. If you go on to most of those kind of Muslim Islamic dawah sort of channels, right? YouTube channels, they'll say something like, okay, this is the approach, right? It's like you have all these prophets that came before, okay? Then around 500-600 years in Arabia, this other guy comes along, Muhammad, another prophet, and he brings with him the same message, okay? Worship of the one God, okay? That's what he's inviting you back to, which is recognition of God, recognition of him as the final messenger of God, and then living in accordance with the statutes and the laws that he brought by whatever revelation he received, okay? And that's all there is to it. You follow that and you're good, you're golden, okay? Submit yourself fully to that and you're good and you're golden, okay? That's essentially it. But then, okay, here's the thing, right? If you stop them there and you say, okay, that's your claim. Now prove to me the Quran is from God, prove to me Muhammad received revelation, and prove to me and justify for me, okay, the morality of Muhammad, okay? If you ask them those questions, guess what? They're going to go immediately on the polemical because they don't want to address them. They don't want to address them. Like, because they know, look, I have had numerous discussions with different Muslims where I've brought up certain things that Muhammad did, okay? And they do one of two things, okay? One, they will if they're a Sunni Muslim, they'll for some reason magically turn into a Shia and then act as if you can cherry pick what's it called? You can cherry pick the Hadiths, even though as a Sunni Muslim, if it's Sahih grade, they have to accept it. But they'll start doing that, okay? When you bring up Hadith they don't like, they'll automatically turn into a Hadith rejecter, like the Shia. That's one of their go-to arguments. It's one of their go-to approaches when you bring up something they don't like. Or they'll just, as I said, they'll try and flip the table and just attack your position because they don't want to defend theirs. It's so strange. It's so strange. How are you convincing me that your religion is true on any level or on any front when you don't want to make an argument for it? You feel uncomfortable having to make an argument for it. People, like, here's the thing, okay? And this is the other thing as well with Muslims. When you try and ask them on the Quran and Muhammad, the conversation might start relatively okay, but once you get into those more probing questions, all of a sudden the conversation takes a dark turn. I've encountered it so many times with conversations with them. They get very uneasy, they get very uncomfortable when they have to defend their Quran and Muhammad. And they feel insulted in some sense that they have to defend their Quran and Muhammad. If I go out and I evangelize, I don't care what questions people ask about Christ or the Bible. I don't sit there and do polemics. Not when I'm talking to someone who asks questions about Scripture. I give them the best case I can for Christianity with all the information that I know. Okay, that's my approach. Okay, but that's not the Islamic approach. The Islamic approach is we'll cherry pick a couple of the stuff that we like because we know there's one or two verses in the Quran that sound nice. There's one or two hadith that sound nice. And we'll hope that if we throw them at whoever's in front of us, they'll quickly buy into the deception. Okay? Because then if you come prepared with some hadith they don't like, then all of a sudden that conversation is going to take a completely different turn. It's not like, for me, someone comes, I don't feel insulted, for example, if someone comes up and they bring something against the Bible, against Jesus. When I say not insulted, I mean, of course, it's like, okay, Christ is God incarnate, right? What you're saying is blasphemous. However, I also have to recognize in that moment, they're not only are they an image bearer of God, but more importantly, it's like what Christ says on the cross: "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." It's sort of like, forgive them, for they know not what they say. Okay, if they truly understood who Jesus was and had that communicated to them in a clear way, and they were able to understand it, right, then they wouldn't be saying the things that they're saying. Okay, if they truly understood it in their heart, they wouldn't say those things. And that's the thing you're cognizant of. That's why when you go to something like 1 Peter 3:15, it says, always be prepared to give a defense, but do so in gentleness and in love. It's like, yes, that's how we do it. Okay, it's not about sitting there and not being willing to have uncomfortable conversations or put yourself in uncomfortable situations where you have to stand firm on the faith, but you do so in a loving way, with the desire being the same desire that God has for them, which is their repentance and their salvation. Okay, but again, that's not the Islamic approach. The Islamic approach is, we'll take one or two of the questions we like, but any of the questions we don't like that make us feel uncomfortable, we're going to kind of start looking down on you. Because I just for those who don't know, I went to when I was at UL, I went to a mosque there at one point, to do some evangelism. And initially they kind of sat down and they were willing to have a conversation with me. There was about 4 or 5 of them, 4 or 5 Muslims, and we kind of sat around in a circle having a conversation. And yeah, like, it's strange because at the start of the conversation, I got them to admit something, but then I applied it to Muhammad, and I said, okay, if that's true and it doesn't work in the case of Muhammad, what does that tell you about Muhammad? And then all of a sudden, like, the conversation kind of turned a little bit more hostile, let's just say, after that moment. And that's all I said. I wasn't putting it across in the sense of, okay, Muhammad's the worst human being imaginable, even though I do believe that personally. He's one of the worst. On a personal basis, I do believe that, but that's not how I lead a conversation when I'm talking to Muslims. But as I said, I even put this, like, okay, I'll tell you what the point was, what I expressed to them, and then how it kind of turned, let's just say, a little bit sour after that moment. But basically, I said to them, if we go with John 15, okay, John 15, I think it's verse 13, if I'm not mistaken. Jesus says there's no greater love than this, that someone lays down their life for their friends. And in other words, his point there is that the highest manifestation of love is found in self-sacrifice. Okay, and the furthest point you can go for any one person is your willingness to lay down your own life on their behalf. That's the last thing you can give. You can give up, that you can offer up to them. You can offer up every single other thing that you have, but the last thing you can offer up is your own life. Okay. Now, if you're willing to do that on behalf of someone, that tells you personally what they believe about that person. Okay. And then that's why he goes on to say, I call you my friends. Okay. So is that the highest manifestation? Is love, for example, best fulfilled through sacrifice? And I would say yes, absolutely, because I think it's an undeniable objective truth that the more you love someone, the further you're willing to go for them. And the furthest point you can go for any one person is your willingness to lay down your life for them. And that is the ultimate manifestation of love. It's the highest manifestation of love, whatever you want to call it. So if that is the highest manifestation of love, which, by the way, they agreed in the conversation that I had with them, and Muhammad's supposed to be the ultimate example on a moral and ethical front, where does Muhammad exemplify that? Where does he enact that in real time, right? This highest manifestation of love. If he's the ultimate example, then he should demonstrate it. Where does he demonstrate it? Now, the reality of it is he doesn't. Muhammad didn't lay down his life for anybody. Muhammad was concerned with his own well-being consistently, not as much with the well-being of those around him. That's why he was able to treat them sort of interchangeably. Okay? In the sense of, okay, if you say something I don't like, you guess what I'm going to do. And we see that consistently in the Quran and the Hadith, right? The way, as well, specifically the Hadith, where Muhammad essentially can't, what's the word for it? He can't handle criticism. He can't handle anyone on any level going against him or his system. And the way that that is met in the Hadith consistently by Muhammad is execution. So, for example, you have a Jewish poet that wrote a satirical poem about Muhammad. Muhammad had him executed. You also have these two women, these two Jewish, I think they were Jewish, but they were slave women. Again, remember, Muhammad did this thing called muta. But anyway, putting that aside for a moment, essentially, these two women, they were singing a song, a derogatory song about Muhammad. And Muhammad's response was execute them. Like, Muhammad had tons of people killed just because, like, he had them killed simply due to the fact that he didn't like what they said about him. He couldn't handle criticism. This is not like what Jesus says, for example, in I think it's Matthew 12, if I'm not mistaken. But essentially, Christ says, anyone who blasphemes or insults, whatever you want to call it, the Son of Man will be forgiven. Okay? So in other words, anyone who blasphemes me will be forgiven. Right? Because Christ tells his followers, if we go in accordance with Luke 6, for example, to bless those who curse you. You know, love your enemies, bless those who curse you. You know, it's sort of like wish well on those who do ill against you. Right? Like, that's a very it's hard to explain, but that's an unconditional kind of love that he's calling his followers into. Okay? And again, it's sort of a reflection of God's love. Because if you go back to something like, and I think this is one of the examples of it, Matthew 5:45, where Jesus says, so that you may be true sons of your Father. Again, sons, which you Muslims don't believe, by the way. So that you may be true sons of your Father who makes this, and Father, you don't believe that either, who makes the sun rise on the just and the unjust. And then he goes on in verse 48 to say, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. The idea there is that sonship to the Father, true sonship to the Father, is demonstrated through your obedience to the Father. So in other words, again, he frames it in the context of a father-son or father-daughter relationship, which is sort of like, look, if he truly is your divine parent and you truly love him, how do you honor your parent? Okay, the way you honor your parent is through obedience. Now, it's not an obedience that stems from this tyrannical ruling where you're kind of subjugated into carrying out an action. Because, like, I could make the argument that we're obedient in some places where we don't want to be obedient, and we're not really doing it out of love. That's not the motivation. There's other motivations. So, for example, in the workplace, what's the motivation? The motivation is you get a paycheck at the end of the week or the month. That's the motivation. That's the only reason you're doing it. You're not doing it because you love the person. You're doing it because, you're doing it out of necessity. In this particular instance, we're talking about a relationship. It's motivated by your heart towards God. Okay, so it's sort of like, okay, if I love you, then that will be demonstrated in real time. That's why, for example, what does Jesus say in John 5? Right, if you love God, you'll obey the commandments. Love for God, right, produces obedience. The product of that love is obedience. It's a natural outflow of that love. So if I love my parent and they tell me to do something, then naturally I'll do it, okay, because of the love that I have for them. And that's the type of relationship he's trying to echo, okay? Again, that's a far cry different from what Muhammad was talking about in terms of Muslims' relationship with the divine. Because according to the Islamic viewpoint, you're just a slave. That's all you are. You're just a slave. And you're nothing more than a slave. Even though the Bible message is consistently against that. But you're going with a guy who comes 500-600 years later, for which, as I said, it's like consistently he's refuted by the evidence that we have today. Which is part of the reason why I don't understand why Muslims go along with the stuff that he says, because at the end of the day, like if you can't produce any evidence whatsoever for his claims and for what he's saying, then I'm just sort of like, well, why go along with it at all then? Like, why go along with it at all? Because at the end of the day, it's like you have to be honest with the data you have in front of you. It doesn't make sense to me, for example, how Muslims can sit there and just blindly follow something they haven't even investigated themselves. I understand where it's coming from. Obviously, when you're indoctrinated into something, you're sort of like set up in some sense to by default to believe in something. But there must come a point of maturity, intellectual maturity, where you ask yourself, okay, but why am I believing this? Is it actually true? Like, again, you have to think more deeply about it. Maybe that could be look, I don't want to I'm not trying to be offensive here, but in some Muslim countries, the education is not great. The education seems to be predominantly, I'm not kidding when I say this, but predominantly the education is Quran and Muhammad. It's orientated around both of those things. And it's sort of like, if that's your education, then it's like no wonder they're not able to think more deeply about these things and think more abstractly. It's because they're, in some sense, they're being denied the capacity for abstract thought. Again, that's a form of manipulation, by the way. That's a form of thought control. And then it's like, well, why do you think it's so difficult to get people away from this particular belief? Well, if that is what's going on and that is what's true, then it's like no wonder. So let us finish up by looking at a clip from God Logic's channel. I want people to see this. So this is where Hamza came on a stream. And I just want I want your guys' thoughts on this. Again, just so for those who are watching, I do this well, mostly with I do this with Daniel, but 9 times out of 10 every Saturday we're doing this. So at any point, even during this stream or the next stream, whatever, feel free to come on and discuss the stuff that was spoken about, and we can have a good discussion over it. But basically, I want us to go through what Hamza on Hamza's Den said when he replied to Avery and during a stream. So I'm going to share this. And then I'm going to give my response to it. And if you're listening and you want to come on, feel free to use the link. I've pinned it in the chat. You can come on. We can have a discussion. Okay, so let's go.
But I'm not here to talk about that.
On whose side?
On your side.
My side?
Yeah. You picked on somebody who didn't have the knowledge to deal with that topic.
What he studied. He studied the topic.
He hasn't.
So you would do better?
Yeah, on that topic, yeah.
So you would do better in proving that
I would do better in
Islam is
demonstrating.
42.
Yeah, I would do better demonstrating the idea of blood sacrifice is required to forgive sin. Yeah, I would. But I'm not here to talk about that.
We got to talk about that one day then. If you
Yeah,
think my
no
argument
problem. But see, my brother thought, oh, you did me this, that, blah, blah, blah. It's just because the brother doesn't have the knowledge. Yeah, he just needs to study a little bit more. Maybe read Book of Ezekiel might help him. But,
I think he did. He went to Ezekiel.
What did he say about Ezekiel?
He went to Ezekiel to say that to try to demonstrate that somebody just has to repent and obey God's laws and commands to and you're good. That blood sacrifice isn't required. That's the argument, right?
And how did you respond to that?
The response is that what God tells the sinner to do, to repent, is to obey his laws and his statutes.
Right.
Which means that according to God's laws and statutes, when it comes to repentance and atonement, it's blood sacrifice.
Not for intentional sin, it's not.
Even for unintentional sin.
No, intentional sin, not unintentional.
Yeah, intentional sin too.
No, not for the wicked, no. Anyway, another topic, another day. Paul, you said some disastrous things today that I don't know why your people...
Ironically, in Ezekiel, I think it's chapter 36, if I'm not mistaken, Ezekiel has a verse where God himself says that he will atone for the sins of his people. Now, look, I'm just saying, as a Muslim, if you want to go to Ezekiel, fine. But, Muslims generally don't actually read scripture properly. because they isolate one specific verse, ignore the context, and then it's like, again, I could do that with the Quran and you guys would have a hissy fit. But putting that aside for a moment, interestingly, I think it's in chapter 36 of Ezekiel, God says that he'll come and atone for the sins of his people. So what do you do with that as a Muslim? Where, for example, does Allah say anyway he's going to come and atone for the sins of his people? That's in the Old Testament, by the way. And that's not the only example of that sort of typology in the Old Testament. But anyway, that's a separate thing. Let's continue watching the video, and then we can react to Hamza's, I would say, sadly disastrous claims.
People think you're a kind of knowledgeable on this topic. You said Paul wrote the book of Hebrews.
I didn't say Paul wrote the book of Hebrews.
You did.
No, I didn't. I mentioned
you did.
Hebrews.
You quoted. You did. You said he wrote half the New Testament, and then you reeled it off, and you included Hebrews.
No, so when I mentioned Hebrews, I mentioned Hebrews.
Yeah, no, God Logic didn't say that. That's a lie on Hamza's part. The point that he was making is the same point that I consistently make. When we talk about the book of Hebrews, the belief is that the content of the book of Hebrews is from Paul, but he didn't write it. Okay, the belief is that it's Paul's teachings written by Luke. Okay, that's kind of the academic position, purely based on the fact that the author of Hebrews stylistically is similar enough to what we have, for example, in Acts and the book of Luke, that they believe that he's the author, but it's Paul's teachings. Okay, therefore we ascribe to it Pauline authorship. Okay. That's what God Logic believes. Okay, so he's not. Again, I don't know why Hamza is even making that argument, because either he didn't listen to the stream or he's just being deceptive. But the next couple of minutes of the stream, they're just going around in circles over this when they don't need to. Again, this is what Muslims have to do, right? If there's no argument to make, you invent one, right, to get away from the real argument.
In line of the New Testament.
Saying, okay, you said. To list.
Muhammad received revelation over a course of 23 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked, so all you have is Acts that talks about that where Paul receives revelation is only in Acts? I said, no, that's when I list the books in regards
to think I'm making this up.
You're not.
A couple of things that make me
bro, start off by proving that Muhammad is greater.
No. I'm here to talk about Paul. I'm here to talk about Muhammad.
I'm sorry. That's the topic.
Yeah.
Again, notice what Hamza's doing, right? Avery's title is very clear, right? Prove Muhammad is greater than Paul. It's a very straightforward title. Prove Muhammad. Okay? Here's the thing, right? If it was prove Muhammad is greater than Nelson Mandela, look, you can disprove hypothetically Nelson Mandela, but as I said at the very start, that doesn't prove Muhammad in relation to anything. You still then have to prove Muhammad. Okay, you've disproved Nelson Mandela, but you still have to prove Muhammad. What's the evidence for Muhammad? You provided evidence against Nelson Mandela, but you didn't provide any evidence for Muhammad. Where's the evidence for that? Okay? Because I could still argue, okay, those things that you said about Nelson Mandela is true, but how does that prove Muhammad is greater? Okay, because you haven't provided any evidence for the contrary. You've just provided evidence one way. And when you're talking about something that's comparative, the argument has to be on both sides, for both sides, to demonstrate, which argument is superior. Okay, you have to present two arguments in the case of a comparative. Okay, and in this context, when he's pressed and he's asked about, given that this was the title of the stream, Muhammad specifically, what does he do? He doesn't want to discuss it. And again, this is the common pathology with Muslims. You ask them about Muhammad, they don't want to talk about Muhammad. Okay, you ask them about the morality of Muhammad, they don't want to talk about the morality of Muhammad. You ask them about hadith where Muhammad did stuff that they know Muhammad shouldn't have done and they're not happy with, and they don't want to discuss it. It's like, guys, you have to justify it. Okay. Like, just for context, I mean, the thing with the Aisha is absolutely despicable. I mean, you're talking about a 6-year-old girl. Can you imagine if you're this is the same analogy we apply today to Muslims, okay? And they still try and justify Muhammad, right? If your daughter is 6, Muslim man shows up at your house, age, let's say he's 54 years old, shows up at your house and says he wants to marry your daughter. How are you going to respond to that? And she's 6. I mean, if you have any sense at all, you'd be reporting that man to prison, right? That's why, look, I've said it before, and I'm in total agreement here. If Muhammad was alive today in the West, he'd be in prison. He'd be in prison. He'd be in life imprisonment, or he would have been assassinated for terrorism. Like those are your two scenarios there, right? And they're both realistic based on a modern context. Okay. Anyway, let's continue to watch this video.
Greater than Paul.
Yeah. So, and you was asked about Paul and why you think he's so great, and you reeled off so many things. So I'm here to contest that.
That was in line.
Well, I mean, I could reel off a couple of things. Paul, for example, if we go to Ephesians 5, verses 25 onwards, Paul demands that husbands love their wives as their own bodies. You don't have that in Islam. In Islam, women are just a sex toy to be abused. So in that context, if you're talking about how Paul views women, I'm going with Paul. Paul didn't condone sex slaves. Muhammad did. Okay. Paul didn't condone, for example, being a PDF file. Muhammad did. Okay. Paul wasn't going around executing people left, right, and center because they disagreed with him. Muhammad did. So when you're asking me who's greater on a moral and ethical basis, there's a clear winner here. This doesn't even need. And like the other thing as well is Paul was celibate. Right? Paul was so devoted. Like, it's funny that Muslims don't even see this, but Paul's devotion to God was so great that he remained celibate. Muhammad couldn't do that. Muhammad was obsessed with lust. Okay? That's why he needed, whatever it was, 12 wives, possibly more on a historical basis. And then on top, and not only that, that even wasn't enough for him. He needed sex slaves as well. He needed to be able to practice muta on top of all those wives. And yet Paul can sit there and be celibate because he's so devoted to God, he believes he doesn't need that. And you're asking me who's the greater example of piety? I mean, it's a no contest. But anyway, and then on top of that, I do believe that Paul's revelation was authentic. I don't believe Muhammad's was. But anyway, let's see what else Hamza has to say.
Of people giving reasons why they think Muhammad is greater than Paul.
No, I'm here to contest Paul, mate. I'm trying to understand why you think Paul's such a great authority. You said you think he's reliable, trustworthy, all of these things. So I'm here to challenge that. Well, if Paul's dismissed, there's nothing to challenge Muhammad, is there? Okay.
No, there is. You see, this is the Muslim approach, and this is where Muslims get it wrong. And this is where people get it wrong as well when they buy into the Islamic argument. I said it at the very start. Muslims, doesn't matter if you dismiss a position, you still have to provide evidence for your own position. All that does is it disproves one position, but how does that prove your own position? It doesn't. You have to provide proof for your own position. Okay? As I used the example of Nelson Mandela. Dismissing Nelson Mandela doesn't prove anything about Muhammad. You have to then prove Muhammad. It's still there. It's still there to be proved. It hasn't been proven. You've just disproven something else. But disproving something else doesn't prove the other thing. You still have to prove the other thing. That's the part of the Islamic deception. They don't ever want to prove their own position. So they'll try and hide behind everything they can to avoid addressing their own position. But yeah.
Well, I could dismiss Muhammad too. So what?
But you said Paul. Anything. So your claim is Paul is greater. So
that's not my claim. My claim is prove Muhammad is greater than Paul. Or not, that's not even my claim, it's my challenge. Prove Muhammad is greater than Paul. That's what you have to do.
Is that what your title is?
Yes, bro. Prove Muhammad is greater than Paul.
So all I've heard you so far is when you was asked why do you think Paul's so great, and you listed so many things which are just not true. So this is why I'm interested in dealing with, because I don't think you have a clue when it comes to Paul. I really don't. You're obsessed with Islam. But you don't know your own religion, I don't believe.
Cool beans. So let's do it how everybody has to start off. You have to start off, because I'm telling you right now, Hamza, you might not like this, but this is how it is. You have to prove how Muhammad is greater than Paul. Both of them right now are on the scales. You have to give your reasonings, and we're going to see if they stand.
We can't prove anything either way. You can believe it. You can't prove it.
Okay.
So you see what he did there, right? You can't prove either way. You can just believe it. Now, the issue with that, there's a very clear issue with that, right? The issue with it is that when it comes to belief, okay, I understand. I get to a degree what he's saying, okay? And I agree with him to a point. I do understand that there is an element of it that is belief, okay? But when it comes to belief in something, unless you're just blindly following something, if you're going to convince someone of something, okay, you have to give them sufficient reason to believe. In other words, Hamza, the only reason you believe what you believe is because you have sufficient reason to believe it. You don't just believe it for the sake of believing it. Okay, so it's not just a matter of pure blind belief in the sense that he's trying to say there. I think that that's just a cope mechanism to get away from what Avery's asking him to do. No, at the end of the day, okay, you believe what you believe because you have sufficient reason to believe it. What Avery's asking you for is provide me with that sufficient reasoning. Okay, because there's stuff for you evidence-wise, okay, logic-wise, intellectually speaking, rationally speaking, right, that have allowed you to come to this conclusion that this is something worth following and worth believing in. What are those things in relation to Muhammad as an example, in relation to Muhammad as being a prophet of God, in relation to the Quran being Kalam Allah? Okay, again, provide the evidence for it. Don't do this game of I don't want to defend any of that. I'm just going to attack your position, and then that'll be my evidence. That's not how it works. As I tell Muslims each and every time I speak with them, dismissing one position isn't an evidence for your own position. You still have to prove your own position, right? You can come up with a great argument and disprove something, but it doesn't prove your own position. You still have to provide evidence. So what's that evidence? It's not, and then don't just say, well, we don't need evidence. It's just belief. Well, if that's the case, why are you attacking my position in the first place? If it's just evidence and we don't need belief, then yeah, okay, fine. I don't need evidence and I'm just believing my position for the sake of believing it. So who are you to tell me otherwise when you're doing the same thing? You see, that's where that'll lead. But again, I don't think he really means that. I think he's just being disingenuous here because he doesn't want to address Avery's question. But yeah.
Okay, so how about this? Let's rephrase it. What is your evidence that Muhammad is greater than Paul? What's your evidence?
Muhammad is a messenger of God.
What makes him a messenger and not Paul?
I don't think Paul received revelation, first thing. I don't think he was in line with the teachings of what he claimed. I don't believe he was a Pharisee.
All right, let's do one thing at a time. All
right, I'll make it easy. Paul was a liar, Muhammad wasn't.
Okay, one thing at a time. Let's start with the first thing. You said that you don't believe that Paul received revelation.
No, let's start from the beginning.
I believe Muhammad did.
Let's make it simple.
That's the first thing you said.
No, I know, but let me nutshell it for you.
No, I don't need
What I'm going to.
No, this right here, we're doing one thing.
No. I'll make it easy. Paul's a liar.
That's fine. That's point 4. That's point 4.
No. Point 1 rolls into all of them. So Paul's a liar. Muhammad isn't.
I got you.
So his claim is that Paul's a liar, Muhammad isn't. Okay, prove it. It's like prove it. Prove Muhammad is true and authentic. No. I'm just gonna focus on Paul because that proves no. What's the evidence for Muhammad? It goes back to what I said before. You can dismiss whoever you want to dismiss. Doesn't prove your own position. Doesn't prove anything about Muhammad. You still have to prove Muhammad. It's like, why is that so uncomfortable for you guys? But anyway, let's hear what he has to say.
So what makes you believe Muhammad received revelation over Paul receiving revelation?
Because Paul's a liar.
Okay, so what makes you think he lied about him receiving revelation?
Because of what he received based upon your text, and what the disciples believed was contrary.
All right, so just to be clear, you're saying that because Paul and what he supposedly received is contrary to what the apostles had, then that would make Paul a liar.
Yes.
Okay, so for somebody to be a true messenger, to have credibility, they would have to be in line with the apostles. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Was Muhammad in line with the apostles?
Please don't do that nonsense.
You see where he goes, right? It's a great question that Avery asks him. It's like, okay, if you're claiming that Paul is a liar based on our text, that he's not in line with what the disciples said, how do you know Muhammad is in line? And then he doesn't want to address it. So it's hilarious. It's the standard that he wants to attack Paul, the standard he wants to attack Paul by he doesn't want to use in any shape or form in relation to Muhammad. That's called a double standard. So in other words, you want to apply a standard over here, but you don't want to apply it over here. That's a non-argument. Okay, that's a disingenuous argument because it's called a double standard. Okay, we don't work off double standards from an argumentation standpoint. Whatever standard you're applying in one way, you have to apply the other. So if you're saying your reasoning, again, it's a great question from Avery. If you're saying that your reasoning for dismissing Paul is you believe he's a liar because he wasn't in line with what the disciples themselves said, okay, and what they taught, how can you prove that Muhammad was? And then obviously he doesn't want to go there for obvious reasons. Because we looked at the video at the very start of this. I brought up the Bart Ehrman video where Bart Ehrman clearly states, for example, that the direct disciples of Jesus believed he was God and worshipped him. Okay, and that Paul did not invent Christianity. Okay, that's an argument Muslims like to use. I don't know why, because it's even rejected by atheists and agnostics within academia. No one's saying that. As Bart Ehrman says, it was already there. It happened immediately, right away. The worship of Jesus happened, okay, by his own disciples, and then that was part of the message that they spread, okay, and that was the message that Paul heard, and then he himself began to spread once he converted. That's all it was. That's all there was to it. For example, Bart Ehrman accepts that Paul was there with the disciples talking to them, okay, and that they were discussing, okay, they were having dialogue for an extended period of time before Paul went out and shared the gospel, okay, after his conversion, okay. That's not really disputed here from an academic standpoint. So again, if that's the consistent viewpoint, how does that in any shape or form lead anyone to believe Muhammad received was true when the academic position is that, yeah, this is what the disciples believed. They believed Jesus was God. Your Quran says they never believed that. Jesus was very clear in what he taught, and that the original followers of Jesus were Muslims. But again, the historical data indicates otherwise. And I think that what Bart Ehrman says is totally true on that. I think, yes, I think that is what happened. I think they had perceived to have seen Jesus risen from the dead, meaning they witnessed what was for them a resurrection. And then that brought with it a complete change in their understanding of Christ. And when I say change, I mean more so sort of a complete affirmation of what they may have already believed about him, but weren't 100% sure of. Okay? Whatever doubts they had, let's say hypothetically, prior to that moment, were completely squashed by that one specific, what would you call it, phenomenological experience that they had, which was they had perceived to seen a man who was clearly crucified and dead get back up 3 days later by his own power. So it's like when they then immediately began to worship Jesus as God, you can see the pathology. You can see what led to that. Okay, and that's the view within academia. Okay, that's, again, I just gave you the one where Bart Ehrman said it, but like, again, Muslims now, when they listen to that, they're going to say, well, I'll take his thing over here, but I'm going to reject that part. It's like, no, you can't do that. That's being inconsistent. Let's see, is there any other words of wisdom that Hamza wants to provide before we finish up?
That's what we're doing.
No, to that. Well, I'm going to.
Like this.
What I'm going to. Yeah, you don't mute me.
Now answer the.
Okay, I want us to look at this. Chaim. Okay. This part of the video, I was actually quite disappointed. I expected better from Hamza here than this. Because if we did the same in Islam, he would have a hissy fit. So basically, this book that he's producing was written by a Jewish scholar, okay? Now, a Jewish scholar who's doing a polemic against Christianity, okay? Now, that same scholar doesn't believe in Muhammad, by the way, but anyway, that's besides the point. So let's see if he's being criticized. So ironically, James D.G. Dunn, one of the big scholars that Muslims like to use simultaneously, believes that, again, he wrote a criticism of this book that this guy wrote and said that it's bogus. Okay, it's pseudo scholarship and it's not based on evidence. That's James D.G. Dunn. That's one of the big guys that Muslims like to use. Okay, he's not the only guy that does that. You have again another work by Oscar Skarshana called Temple of the or Shadow of the Temple: Jewish Influences on Early Christianity. Again, this is an earlier view, a minority position that is refuted in academia today, that is disregarded and dismissed. So in other words, Hamza's best argument against Paul is to go to an outdated, dismissed position that academia universally rejects. And then that's going to be his argument against Paul. And he thinks that that's a good argument. Like, if I did that in Islam, imagine, like, for example, there's some Islamic scholars who believe, by the way, and when I say Islamic scholars, I mean, somewhat credible Islamic scholars, like Shabr Ali. You can say what you want. The guy has a PhD from a reputable university. He believes categorically that Jesus was on the cross. That's his scholarly view, based on what, for him, the Arabic says. Okay. Now, if I produce that as evidence against Islam, you guys are going to be like, well, that's not, that's not a universally accepted position. Okay, that's a dismissed position within the Islamic paradigm, universally speaking, by most Muslims today. But some Muslims today believe it. So, yeah, that's the thing I would say. I was disappointed that Hamza did that, because I would have expected more. I mean, if you're gonna produce scholarship, produce credible scholarship, not scholarship that's dismissed by other scholars and is universally rejected today. But if that's the best argument he can produce, I guess that's the best argument he can produce. He has to go to outdated, dismissed research. Okay. If that's what you need to do to try and make an argument, if that's as strong an argument as a Muslim can make today, well then, okay.
The question: did Muhammad agree with the apostles? Answer.
It will help you. It will help
Answer
you.
the question.
Yeah, you don't mute me. Who are you? You've been unchallenged in your claims about Paul,
Answer the
and as
question,
soon as you're
please, right? I
pressed,
gotta move on to the next
your
person.
audience can see you can't defend Paul. You're clueless, mate.
All right.
Yeah, I
Thank-
steamroll.
He didn't steamroll him. I mean, look, the reality of it was that Avery asked him prove Muhammad. He goes to Paul, and then his best argument against Paul is outdated, dismissed research. How is that steamrolling someone? Again, that's like me producing Shabr Ali, who says that Jesus was crucified and was on the cross, and saying that, well, I just produced that, so now I've steamrolled you. When I know, for example, that Muslims don't accept that today. Okay, that's why I don't produce that as an argument. I'll only demonstrate it to demonstrate to them that it's plausible that the earliest followers of Muhammad may have believed that Jesus was on the cross, but Allah preserved him. And this idea of substitution came later. However, I do believe it's also plausible that Muhammad did believe in this idea of substitution, because that's what the Gnostics believed. And I believe that much of it's not that I believe it. Evidence tells us that the majority of what's in the Quran is borrowed from Gnostics and apocryphal Jewish stuff. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that substitution was the original idea. Or maybe the other idea was. We don't know. But again, I'm not going to really produce... when I say not really, I'm just not going to do it, because it's not fair to produce dismissed scholarship today as an argument against Islam. That doesn't make any sense. I'm only going to use credible sources that are unanimously accepted within the field of scholarship, or I'll use what is for you an authority. Because if you claim that someone's an authority, then I'm going to use them. And the only reason I use them is so that it's not because I view them as an authority. It's to demonstrate that you guys are being inconsistent in the sources that you're using. Because the same sources that you try and use against also work against you. So there's that side. There's that side to it.
Christians
Hamza,
all
thank you
day
so much.
on
I appreciate
Paul.
it.
I
Appreciate
wanted a challenge,
Take care.
and you can't.
Take care of yourself now. Go ahead and watch your head, man. Watch your head.
Yeah, I mean that was near. That was like near manifestation. Hamza near. It's just pretty much manifesting in that. But yeah, that's Islam for you. And I guess as Muslims, that's what you have to do. That's the level of deception you have to work with to try and make an argument when there is none. So yeah, we'll end it there. Thank you so much for everyone who watched and joined. As I said, every Saturday, pretty much, I'll be doing this at the same time, starting 1 p.m. Irish time. So feel free to come on. Feel free to have a discussion. I'll be happy to go through anything with you guys. And yeah, we can pick it up next week. But in the meantime, I pray that you guys really take to heart the things that were said, really consider what was said. And I hope that if you take into consideration all the stuff that was said in a rational and sincere way, that and in an open way, more importantly, that you may be open to receive the love that God has for you, made manifest through his Son, which is for your salvation, which is for your repentance, which is for your eternal, which is for your eternity to be with him, right? Because that's why God did what he did through the Son, was for your salvation, because of how he views you, because of how precious you are in his eyes. So yeah, I pray that for all of you listening, in Jesus' name. Amen.